Welcome back to the channel, guys. And you know, one of the things, if you're a Tri-5 owner and you're trying to get some work done, uh, there's no shortage of vendors for reproduction parts. And thank God we have them. Now, 40 years ago, when I had my first 55 Chevy, I bought it at the age of 19 in October 1979. And I'll throw a picture up here, what it looked like. But I had no real interest in doing anything, upgrading it, or until I started thinking about painting it. And it had a one-piece fiberglass front end, and the paint on it was cracked from all the flexing it did. It wasn't. If I'd kept it, I would have had to have braced it much better, because it just when you raised it, it's like the ends of the fender where the locks were, just flopped around. So paint had stress cracks. And so when I took it to a body shop, every body shop I took it to was like, "Well, we won't guarantee the paint on that." And I'm thinking, well, okay. And I eventually made the decision to replace the fiberglass front end and put steel back on it. And that presented its own problems. For starters, I had no idea how everything went together, and I wasn't sure what parts I didn't have. So anyway, I had a friend in another part of the county who was very familiar with Tri-5 Chevys. And he kind of guided me on all, I needed inner fenders, I needed this part, and everything. So over a period of about a year, I accumulated enough original steel parts to have a doghouse. And the funny thing is, the parts that I gathered, I ended up swapping the hood and one fender with someone else. And it's the case of he had a better quality, less rust fender than I had. So I did a lot of horse trading, upgrading the quality of the parts I had. And actually, the driver's door, I ended up finding a much better conditioned door. And of course, the car's a hardtop, so you couldn't use a sedan door or anything like that. But the door I got actually was a convertible door. And I didn't realize that till I had the door stripped down, and I took the door off the car and was removing all of the Bel Air specific trim around, especially around the vent window and that. And I noticed a difference in the of how the door was made and some of the steel. Everything fit together just the same, even though it was a convertible door. I'm shopping for parts, right? And the car, as I got it, was stripped of all the only chrome on the outside of the car were was a quarter trim on each side, starting at the door going back to the bumper. It had no hood bird, none of the front and back trim. Now, where do you find this stuff? Remember, it's 1980. It's pre-Google, pre-internet. And, you had to shop by phone or mail order, and that was it. So, and I'm not sure how I heard about this guy and his business. I found out that I could buy parts, reproduction parts, at a place called O.B. Smith Classic Cars and Parts in Lexington, Kentucky. And I needed a lot of all the exterior trim, other parts inside the car. Now, I wasn't restoring it. I just wanted it more complete. I wanted it to look like a Bel Air with all the Bel Air trim. I went to O.B. Smith in Lexington for that. Now, remember, I'm a 19-year-old kid coming in buying car parts. Let's just say I wasn't his intended audience. In addition to selling reproduction parts, he always had a lineup of beautiful Tri-5s that were either original condition West Coast cars or restored, concours quality car show Tri-5s. The most popular Tri-5, I think, at that time seemed to be black 57 Chevrolet convertibles. And he always would have some convertibles, and he seemed to have a lot of Bel Air coupes. But these cars were beautiful. They were gorgeous. I didn't even want to touch them. And so, here's a 19, 20-year-old kid coming in, and I want to buy parts. And now, he was a nice guy, but I've never felt like he cared to give me the time of day. We weren't going to buy one of his expensive, beautiful cars. Now, when I say expensive, I'm thinking in $1980, not $20, $25. Expensive back then was breaking $10,000. Oh, if I'd only had money back then when I was that young and bought half a dozen of his cars and just parked them in a warehouse, they'd be worth beaucoup money today. O.B. Smith in Lexington. One of the things he had going on, if you spent $75 on parts, you would get a free O.B. Smith t-shirt. I will tell you, for about a year, I was a frequent customer of O.B. Smith's. My girlfriend was heading to UK anyway in Lexington, so I made frequent trips to O.B. Smith's. Now he had two locations. Well, he was at one location first, and then he moved to a larger location. And I bought all the exterior trim I needed. My 55 Bel Air was only 26 years old, maybe at the time, 25, 26. So all the window fuzzies, all the rubber was in acceptable shape. So I didn't have to rebuild any of the windows or any of the fuzzies or the tracks. However, the car was missing all of the gaskets, door gaskets, trunk gasket, the seal that goes under the hood between the cowl and the hood. Um, missing a number of those things, and I also bought patch panels because when I stripped the paint off of my 55 Bel Air, I found a lot of rust, and actually, whoever fixed it the last time brazed in galvanized metal patch panels. It looks like they beat them with a Alpine hammer into shape and then put on the Bondo like crazy. Anyway, so I needed patch panels. Now, an interesting lesson I learned was that back 40 years ago, patch panels that they sold were not exactly the same as what you have today. Now, I ended up with rocker panels. That's a simple patch panel. They didn't have complete fenders. You could get the bottom corner and maybe the wheel well opening. The same on the rear quarter. On the quarter panel, you could buy the front lower section and the rear lower section. You could buy the lower, maybe the lower half of the quarter panel, left and right. And they had what they called a complete quarter panel, but all it was the contours of the lower quarter panel to about this far above the rear wheel arch, and then it was just straight. It was not formed at all. It wasn't anywhere near a complete quarter panel. But they did a good job. They did good. They had always had parts in stock, and I will tell you, my family, was a joke among my family that I got so many O.B. Smith classic cars and parts t-shirts that I was giving them away to my girlfriend, her family, my family. Everybody who wanted a free t-shirt got one. I spent much money at O.B. Smith. Um, Now, a little history. He incorporated his business in 1984, I believe, but he was in business before that, unincorporated. And his business ran on for, I think, up until about 2000. And I think I think his obituary, he died in the early 2000s of complications from Alzheimer's, which was sad. And I will tell you, I never felt. I think his vision of me when I walked in every time was I'm just some dumb kid with a 55. Perhaps I was. I'm just a dumb old guy with 55. The market has changed, and I don't know that reproduction parts are much cheaper. They're just easier to get. I never would have envisioned there would be a day when I could pull up a website and order the parts and pay electronically. I never saw this coming. But I'm thankful it's here because we have so many more resources. A little story about the full-size quarter panels, because I got one for my Chevy because I needed to replace both the front and the rear lower quarter panel. It was just Bondo and rust, and so I thought, well, I'll get this. And the body man who had work on my Chevy. Now he was an old school guy, really good, and he had his sons working with him. Well, the sons maybe weren't so good at replacing patch panels. Anyway, he took a blowtorch, a cutting torch, and he went down the whole side of the car, about midway, about the level of the where the trim goes. Now that's some pretty thick metal, and the heat of the cutting torch. There's not a lot of support in that quarter panel. the shape of it, and so it warped the daylights out of that edge when it cooled. It just warped the hell out of it. And he calls me up and he says, "Well, are you sure this quarter panel is supposed to fit? You only need as much as you need. You know, you could." He said, "Yeah, but when I cut that quarter panel with a torch, it warped like crazy." I'm like, "Duh." And I was extremely unhappy to get a phone call like that. And so I called O.B. Smith's and talked to his son. Anyway, I told him what had happened, and this guy cut it with a torch. I could just hear the exasperation in his voice. And he said, are you sure this guy's a professional using a cutting torch and then not expecting the sheet metal to warp? Well, you know, it's like a lesson learned, I guess. But to get things matched up and get that quarter panel put back together, he had to use, he bolted it together. And he didn't dare weld it and didn't try to straighten anything. I think actually he riveted it in place, smeared it with a thick layer, very thick layer of Bondo to get everything smooth, and then had to drill holes for the to attach the trim. But I'll tell you, I undid the trim from the trunk, and the Bondo looked like a tunnel of Bondo, and and I paid him a lot of money. And he said, "Well, we can't guarantee that won't crack." And I'm like, "Well, if you hadn't screwed it up in the first place, you might have, might be able to guarantee your work." Anyway, I was unhappy with that, but I will tell you, I had the car 34 years, and there was nary a crack, and there was no evidence that there was that much Bondo there. I mean, if you had a modern paint film thickness gauge, yeah, you'd probably find it. But it looked good. It looked fine, and I was happy. I was real happy with that. Anyway, that's my story about the 55 and O.B. Smith. O.B. Smith he was a godsend for a guy trying to find parts. And of course, I was going to all the swap meets I could, and I I was trying to the last trim I needed for my 55 Bel Air after it was painted were the front fender spears, and they start at the door and go forward to the front of the fender. Well, I had a lead on him, a guy here. His grandfather had almost a Tri-5 junkyard, and he said he'd sell me the full set, four pieces for $100. And that was a little extravagant, but I'm like, yeah, I gotta have it. I gotta have it. He kept saying he would get it to me. He would get it to me. Well, Granddaddy said no. It's weeks away from the Carcraft Street Machine Nationals. I got the exterior of the car looking good, except for the holes down the front fenders where the trim's supposed to go. So my next choice to find trim was the Cayenne swap meet at the Kentucky Fair and Exposition Center. Huge swap meet's been going on for many years. I found a seller selling trim for fit Tri-5s, and he had a complete set. The fender spears I wanted, and so I'm asking what he wants for them, and he says $250, and I'm like, wow. And so I try to negotiate. Well, if you take a little less, no, because there was no reproduction of that stuff yet. So, and I had to have it, so I shelled out the money, brought the chrome home. But it looked good for all the years I had the car. And I don't think you could buy complete bumpers in those days, but there was a company in Louisville, Kentucky called Bumpers Inc. down in the west end of Louisville. And it was in an old manufacturing building that almost looked like it was derelict, been abandoned. But the company was, they had the old style sign up or painted front of their building with Bumpers Inc. across it, and they did a wonderful job. I took my bumpers in and they replated them, and they looked and looked wonderful. And they had to take there was quite a bit of surface rust. Anyway, that's all I got today, guys. Little history about O.B. Smith, and I think about him from time to time, and all the T-shirts we had. And I finally, not long ago, I did a little search on eBay for O.B. Smith. One of his old T-shirts is listed, and I will tell you, I've been tempted to buy it just for old time's sake. You know, when I think of all the money I spent at his business. Now, of course, I didn't buy $10,000 Tri-5s from him. I would have loved to, but that wasn't the market. He wasn't marketing those to a 20-year-old. All right. Well, thanks for watching, guy. If you have any comments or if you bought parts from O.B. Smith, let me know. All right. Enough for now, guys. Thanks for watching. Again, leave a comment below. Subscribe if you want to keep track of what's going on. All right. That's it, guys. I would appreciate your comments if you ever bought parts from O.B. Smith and or if you were buying parts in the day when we didn't have the internet. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time here in the Shade Tree Garage.